There was a time when there were like more than 100 car companies in the US, I believe, or at least close to that. And if you go like look at some of the old media at the time, it was like, no, there's this better car, no, there's this better one, no, there's this better one. I think that same thing holds true for most new industries. I think it's fine. I mean, it's probably good, but I don't think that's where the enduring value will be. I think eventually it will shake out. There will be a small number of providers, just dozens, something like that, doing models at big scale, and it'll be extremely complex, extremely expensive. And I hope we all continue to push each other to make the models better, cheaper, faster, and commoditize in that sense. And the long-term differentiation will not be, I don't think, the base model. Like that's just, intelligence is just like some emergent property of matter or something. The long-term differentiation will be the model that's most personalized to you, that has your whole life context, that plugs into everything else you want to do, that's like well integrated into your life. But for now, the curve is just so steep that the right thing for us to focus on is just make that base model better and better.
Arthur at Mistral, I'm so intrigued to hear your thoughts. How do you think about the focus on just model improvement, where value accrues, and ultimately are the foundation models commoditizing in themselves?
There's two opposing directions. So the first is that the models are getting better and better. So it means that creating a verticalized application, as long as you have the data for it and a good understanding of the use case you're facing, is going to be easier and easier if you have access to the tools that facilitate it. So that's the first aspect, which would make me think that the application layer is going to grow thinner and thinner. But then there's also the fact that the models are getting cheaper and cheaper because we managed to compress them, because we make a lot of improvement on their efficiency. And so that means that effectively this plus the competitive pressure there is on the model layer means that the price around the model, the dollar per intelligence unit, let's say, is definitely going to reduce. So there's these two aspects of growing ability, compressed price, which on one side says that the application layer is going to grow thin, and on the other side says that the model part is going to grow thin. So for us, the approach that we are taking is that the model part is still going to be big enough, and that we need to build this platform on top of that, because that's where we are going to enable all of the vertical applications that will be interesting for humanity.
Tom Hulme at GV, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think about that, the commoditization of the models, and whether there's money to be made investing in the foundation model themselves or actually in the application layer beneath it?
My first observation would be the technology is commoditizing incredibly quickly, which worries me a lot. So I think I likened, when we talked the other day, it to investing a few $100 million into a power station. That's the training time, and then you can turn it on and you've got inference coming out the side. That's your power. Now, the problem is this is an industry where it's going to take you a few months to build your power station, and everyone else is building similar power stations next door with relatively little edge. They're all using the same GPUs. They're marginal improvements, but you basically got to depreciate that asset in these foundation models over a few months. I just can't see it happening. And then now we've got Meta coming into the market. I mean, Zuckerberg's done an amazing job. He'll have 350,000 H100s by the end of this year. That is 14% of the world's H100s, and he's going to open source the result. Llama 3, released last week, is already incredible. He's pledged that he's going to invest another $100 billion or so. He's already started to train Llama 4, that team, and they're world-class. They're formidable competitors. So to invest now in an asset that you think you're going to have to depreciate, over the space of weeks or months is very difficult to do. Now, we have made investments in Gen AI, but more in infrastructure, more in the application layer, more in the sort of picks and shovels to support, but we've not thus far invested in foundation models.
Is there money to be made investing in foundation models? When you look at the quantum of capital that is required to go in, there's obviously rumors of Mistral's new funding around. You see the amount of cash that's gone into OpenAI and everyone else. The dilution inherent within that is just going to be monstrous. Is there money to be made investing in foundation models, do you think?
There definitely has been, because if you were to invest in OpenAI in the $10 billion round, there's liquidity in the market. You could sell that for a 5x now, and you could have done that over a year. So if you've got a momentum strategy and you believe that firm that you're investing in is going to be at the front of the pack and continue to be, I suspect there's money to be made. But if you're investing in fundamentals, it's very difficult to invest in something that actually is going to commoditize that quickly. In fact, I'd say the best teacher I ever had was Clay Christensen, just unbelievably smart human being. He wrote The Innovator's Solution. We all know that. And he will talk about, or he did talk about sustaining and disruptive innovations. I think one of the frustrations with Gen AI, as the technology is commoditizing so quickly, is it's a sustaining innovation. It's actually going to get sprinkled across all businesses to lower costs in call centers or to improve the product in personalization. It's not going to have a creative destruction effect like the internet did on many industries. And so as an investor, that's frustrating because you want to invest in stuff that persists and completely rebuilds industries from scratch. But I can't really see it. I mean, we found some targets and we've made quite a few investments, but it's not, for me, the sort of radical sort of shift or opportunity from an investment perspective that we perhaps saw with the internet.
What do you think the end state then is for models? I was with a friend who will remain nameless because he hates being publicly named anywhere, and he mentioned that, bluntly, cloud providers will be the cash cow business, and they will buy your Googles, your Amazons, and your Microsofts, will basically buy the foundation model companies, acqui-hire them a la inflation, and then have cash cow businesses in the cloud providers, and then give away the foundation models for free.
Yeah, that's to date been my thesis as well. It will look more like a utility, and the cloud providers rationally are saying we want to provide that utility on our compute, and they're going to charge on that basis. And they already are, whether you're on AWS, GCP, anywhere else.
Des Traynor at Intercom, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You use OpenAI to power Finn in many respects. Where do you think that the value is going today? How do you think about the commoditization of these models? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Right now, a lot of value is going straight into the infra. Like, as in, we're handing it all at the back door to OpenAI. And we actually torture test all of the LLMs. It's not yet the case that they're all equal. I'd be wary of Amazon. So, like, I could see Amazon just, like, flat up, like, buying Anthropic and being like, let's just make this part of the EC2 cluster. I think Apple will make massive strides forward with AI. I feel like Bard unfortunately felt like we had to release this because ChatGPT was getting a lot of traction. They need to have that Jay-Z, like, allow me to reintroduce myself moment. But I think it's a really important attribute to be able to transition from one LLM to another. Because if somebody does unlock new power, you'll want to be able to use it very quickly. Winning involves more than just simply being agnostic about your LLM.
Speaking of being agnostic about your LLM, would you invest in OpenAI at $90 billion then, Des?
I don't think I would, and the reason, whilst I think they'll pass 90, the areas I'd be wary of is Amazon. Amazon play this game well. So, like, I could see Amazon just, like, flat up, like, buying Anthropic and being like, let's just make this part of the EC2 cluster. And that's just a very easy route to market. And I think if OpenAI run out of new vectors of differentiation and the commoditization starts to kick in, even for basic stuff, I think it'll just become an easier, like, why wouldn't you just use Amazon? It's already in the cloud. It's already virtually private. It's, you can, like, leapfrog a lot of other adoption concerns. So I think they're one risk.
Tom Hulme, my friend, what about you? Would you invest in OpenAI at $90 billion valuation?
I would struggle to make that investment today. And it's not because I don't respect the team. My biggest concern at the moment, but if I observe the emergence of what Meta's doing, if I look at the arms race of what the cloud providers are investing in and the sort of Gemini, etc., any advantage is pretty ephemeral. And the consumer-facing product that drives, I don't know, is it 50% of the revenue, something like that, is not sticky. So to invest in a foundation model, what would I want to be true? I would want to believe that they had some unique approach that made them more defensible. So an obvious one is memory. Like, actually, none of these have cracked memory yet, but if you have a personal assistant, a ChatGPT equivalent, and it remembers so that it can actually be applied probabilities as to what you want going forward, then it's interesting. If it's unique in its ability to take agency, then it might be interesting. There's other orthogonal approaches that might be interesting. But if we're just talking about a foundation model where you've got to throw huge amounts of data, hundreds of millions of dollars of compute at H100s like everyone else, it's very difficult to see a return on these investments.
Tom Tungas, I know you've done some work around the analysis of where value was created in terms of application versus infrastructure layer for the cloud generation. I'd love to hear how you think about this moving forwards in the next few years with foundational models versus application layer, and what the analysis from the last generation could tell us about the next generation.
I ran this analysis. So in Web 2, if you take the top 3 clouds and you look at their market cap, so AWS, GCP, and Azure, it's about a $2.1 trillion market cap just for the cloud businesses. And then if you take the top 100 publicly traded cloud companies, both on B2C and B2B side, so Netflix and ServiceNow, they have equivalent market cap, about 2.1 trillion for both. So one's at the infrastructure layer, one's at the application layer. Market cap is basically equivalent. The difference is the infrastructure layer, there are 3 businesses, and at the application layer, there are 100. If the analogy holds, as an investor, the odds of success are going to be significantly higher at the application layer because the diversity of needs there is greater.
Emad, formerly of Stability, what do you think? How do we see the end state for foundational model companies? What does that look like? Are there going to be many? Is it going to be a concentrated set of fewer players? How do you think about that?
I think that there's only going to be 5 or 6 foundation model companies in the world in 3 years, 5 years. I think it's going to be us, NVIDIA, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, and Meta and Apple probably are the ones that train these models.
Is Anthropic good?
Anthropic are great, but from a business model perspective, you have Claude on Google API, and you have Palm 2. How are they going to keep up with Palm 2? They can raise billions, but Google spend $20 billion a year on AI. DeepMind's salary budget is $1.2 billion a year. They technically make $1 billion a year from their internal counterpayments with Google as well. But again, Google, how much money do they have? $150 billion to win this.
Okay, so we spent a good amount of time now trying to understand whether the model landscape will commoditize and where true value is built in that segment of the market. When we think about the consumer or the application layer, so to speak, the application layer that sits on top of these models, I'd love to start with Sam Altman at OpenAI, who better, in understanding how do we think about where value lies in terms of infra versus application layer and the different strategies to build on top of AI right now.
There are 2 strategies to build on AI right now. There's one strategy, which is assume the model is not going to get better. And then you kind of like build all these little things on top of it. There's another strategy, which is build assuming that OpenAI is going to stay on its same rate of trajectory and the models are going to keep getting better at the same pace. It would seem to me that 95% of the world should be betting on the latter category. But a lot of the startups have been built in the former category. When we just do our fundamental job, we're going to steamroll you.
Brad, you're the COO of OpenAI. What is a simple question that a company or a founder can ask to determine whether they will be steamrolled or not by OpenAI?
Ask the company whether 100x improvement in the model is something they're excited about. It's actually, we can tell pretty well because we know the companies that come to us saying, we want the next model. When is it coming out? When is it coming out? I want to be the first to try it. It's going to be the best thing for my company. And then there's a lot of companies that we don't hear from in that regard. And I think that's like a pretty good delineation is if there's a clear path to how better intelligence, better underlying intelligence accelerates that product in that company, most companies can tell that story really clearly.
Des, you're a founder obviously of Intercom, and you build with OpenAI today integrated into your product. How do you think about a thin wrapper versus a thick wrapper, and whether OpenAI will or will not steamroll a potential startup?
A thick wrapper is like when you've actually solved the user's problem end to end fully in a way that OpenAI never will. OpenAI will hit some sort of minimum viable, like kind of what's good enough for everyone. You're never going to make money filling in the gaps in a platform, the thing they haven't gotten around to yet. Like I described that as like, it's like you're on a train tracks picking up, euros or dollar coins or whatever. There's a train coming. It's going to hit you at some stage. It doesn't matter how rich you get. That thing's hitting you, right? I think if you find an area where they're not going to go that deep. OpenAI is never going to put like 5 of their engineers going hard on wealth management and banking integrations. Yeah. So like that's the thing. Like you pick an area and you say, let's do all of it. Let's just do a little tech demo science fair. Let's nail the use case.
Sarah Tavel, you're obviously an investor at Benchmark today. I'd love to hear your thoughts about where you see enduring value being created, whether it's in the foundational model layer or whether it's actually in the application layer moving forwards.
I just am a huge believer that the application layer is going to drive most of the value, because what you have to imagine is who owns the user over time. If you own the end user, you're able to provide more and more value to them over time and capture that value. There's, and we can talk about what happens to the underlying models. There's certainly just incredible, intense competition. Is it going to be an oligopoly? Is it going to be, we can talk about those subjects, but I focus on the application layer because I do think that's where just a tremendous amount of value ends up being captured and created.
Tom Blomfield at Y Combinator, you have this incredible perspective. You see so many thousands of companies that apply for YC every year. How do you think about the wrappers versus non-wrappers in AI? And then also, bluntly, where the excitement is, whether it's in application layer versus infrastructure layer?
There are clearly some wrappers. You know, if you can build it in a weekend at a hackathon and make a bunch of money, probably not defensible. For most businesses building on top of these models, you know, you can describe the last generation of startups as like MySQL wrappers or AWS wrappers or something. Like, you know, it's the same kind of logic applies. I think where the sustaining value lies is identifying an industry, deeply understanding the regulation in that industry, the tooling, the language, all of the training, how people sort of work and behave and act, and tailor your software to fit into that industry in a way that's extremely deeply embedded. And most people building application layer stuff in an AI say it's 80 to 90% traditional software with 10% AI. It's working in construction, figuring out how Procore works, or you know how the Salesforce CRM works, or some Oracle database. And like, I don't think OpenAI is going to come and steamroll the construction company, AI companies, because they're not going to deeply integrate into the processes and software that exist in each of those industries. So I really believe everyone who works with a computer will have an AI co-pilot assistant thing in the next 2 or 3 years, whether you're like an oncologist or a law professor.
Tom, it's so interesting you say there about the co-pilot strategy. It's the strategy that I see as the entry wedge for all startups today when I'm investing. Miles Grimshaw at Thrive, I know you have some thoughts on the co-pilot strategy. So hit me. How do you think about the co-pilot strategy today for startups, and how you feel about it?
I think co-pilot is an incumbent's strategy. Incumbents own distribution, they own data, they own the UX, and they own a business model that all aligns to a co-pilot. Co-pilot as GitHub Copilot, right? Like inline suggestions. Think of it like how most go to any Microsoft product right now. Every Microsoft product now is a Copilot experience. There's sort of a sidebar, an autofill, things like that, right? Where the UX, the core product is a layer on top of it, right? It's immediately added in, which is also totally an incumbent strategy. And it's still about sort of supercharging that worker, but still where every user has a seed and every user is doing most of the work. And it works probably, you know, if you think about the evolution here, the models, most of what's rolled out might not be good enough for some of this yet, right? But that's what will come around the corner. You know, if you think back to Salesforce disrupting Siebel, Salesforce launched like 5 years after Netscape launched. Like, it might take a moment for that to happen, but the co-pilot, this idea of I'm still the pilot, I'm still the user controlling everything, and it's sort of like giving me assistive suggestions like GitHub Copilot, fits into the UX of incumbents, it fits into the business model of incumbents, and they already control all that distribution. The opportunity offered up to a startup being a co-pilot for something else, like, probably won't be that amazing. And there might be pockets of it where it can really work, but the opportunity to disrupt is to be orthogonal to the incumbents.
It's so interesting to hear you say about kind of being orthogonal to the incumbents. My next question from that is, well, how does that then change the business model and the pricing model that SaaS providers use when thinking about selling to their customers? And Sarah Tavel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I know you have a different take on this that I love. So how do you think about that?
What AI enables is actually a very different unit of work that you sell, which is doing the work. And so you're almost a software company that looks like a services business that is able to sell like the full work product, the outcome, as opposed to selling software that an employee has to learn to use and then gets a productivity boost from. And this is very disruptive to incumbents because incumbents are used to thinking about selling per seat and pricing per seat based on the cost of the headcount. But if instead you're selling something that doesn't require a seat, that is like a very disruptive opportunity for startups.